Hi folks, this is Rob Ager, and today we're going to be talking in depth about anger and revenge fantasies. Now, for those of you who've never seen my work before, you're probably asking yourself straight off the bat, who the hell is this guy and why is he talking about the psychology of anger and revenge fantasies? Well, I did do 17 years work in mental health. I worked in probation, I worked with the homeless, I worked with lots and lots of different people who had various problems in their lives that made them very angry. And I'd have to communicate with those people and deal with it. So I had a lot of practical experience with that. I also grew up in some very rough parts of my home city of Liverpool here and experienced a lot of street level anger and violence along the way. And that taught me a few things as well. Plus I've studied loads and loads of psychology over the years. So all of those things together, I feel like I've got some interesting stuff to say on these topics. This study is going to be broken up roughly into three parts. The first is going to be what I consider to be the central causes of anger and revenge fantasies, the core psychological elements that virtually always underpin it. The second will be how these feelings and thoughts affect our lives, how they bring us a lot of pain, a lot of harm, a lot of torment, and the last part of the video will be about practical ways that you can deal with your anger and revenge feelings so that they affect you a lot less. But before we get into all that stuff, I first want to differentiate between what I call retained anger and preventative anger. Now, preventative anger is very practical and useful and important to our survival. If somebody's doing bad things to you or threatening you or doing similar to someone who's close to you, sometimes you want to have a state of anger because it prepares you to do battle with that person, to stop them from doing bad things to you or to your loved ones. If anger didn't serve a purpose at all, then it wouldn't really be built into our biological system. So this video isn't going to be about preventative anger because that's a practical thing and it's useful. I don't want to try and interfere with that for you guys. It's more about what I call retained anger, where there's a situation in the past that has made you angry, and being angry about it or harbouring revenge fantasies about that situation doesn't serve any practical purpose for your future or for the future of anybody else that you know. And the same goes for revenge fantasies. There's what I'll call preventative revenge, which I would say our legal system has that. You know, the legal system is kind of set up not just to punish people for the crimes that they have done, but also to try and make sure that they don't do it again. You know, the message from the legal system is if you do these bad things, you will be punished. And the whole idea is to prevent future crimes. That's the priority of the legal system. So that's preventative revenge. So we're not going to be talking about that, but we will be talking about the type of revenge fantasies that don't serve any purpose of preventing some future bad thing from happening. So let's start off first by defining exactly what anger is in the most basic practical sense. Anger is the desire or the urge to inflict violence upon somebody else. If you ever meet somebody who's angry, or you're angry yourself, if you pay attention to the physiology, that is, the physical state of the person, you typically find that there are elements of violence preparation that are built into the angry state. So an angry person will frown, you know, the muscles tense up, the shoulders will tense up, sometimes the hands will tense up, the fingers, they might even form fists, or they might clench their teeth. And all of that tensing is a preparation for violence. They may not consciously believe that they are wanting to inflict violence, but underneath it all, there's like an unconscious process where they're anticipating or wanting to be violent towards another person. That's the angry state. The blood flow increase and the heart rate increase, all of these things are like a preparation. It's like the unconscious is saying, okay, it's time to be violent. Like you're getting ready for a boxing match or something like that. But revenge doesn't necessarily have to be in an angry form. Revenge can come in destroying somebody's reputation, destroying somebody's belongings, doing something that's sort of sneaky, that doesn't involve a physically tense state. Revenge can be taken in very calm ways. You could call revenge punishment fantasies. It's a more specific term for it. So that's our definitions. Anger is the urge or desire to be violent, and revenge fantasies are the desire to punish somebody else. Okay, now let's get into the root psychological causes. I've come to the conclusion over the years that anger and revenge fantasies, when they're not about changing a present situation, from a bad one into a good one. When it's retained anger or it's revenge fantasies that don't serve a purpose for the future, the basic underlying cause of those emotions and feelings and urges is denial. Denial about things that happened in the past. Now those events are actually gone, they're done, they're over, and they can't be changed. But people have not accepted that those experiences happened. They want to deny that those experiences happened. They want to try and change the past. And they think that the way to do that is to take the person who they perceive to be an abuser or punisher who existed in the past and inflict some harm upon them. They believe that by doing that, they will then be relieved of the pain of those memories. It's essentially a denial of past trauma, a non-acceptance of a previous incident. I think a good term for that, which I've written down here, is denial rage. I think that's a good term for retained anger about the past. Just call it denial rage. And these feelings are also underpinned by a sense of entitlement, the feeling that one is entitled to be compensated for things that they've suffered in the past, with the compensation sometimes being the entitlement to punish somebody in the past who's done something bad to you. I've also coined a little term here that are called the ROLESWAP fantasy, which is an element of this compensation and punishment built into revenge fantasies, with the idea that people want to reverse the victim-abuser roles. They want to become the abuser and to subject their previous abuser to the experience of being the victim. And it's understandable in a way. I mean, it makes people feel like if they can do that, then it will balance the universe out. It will balance their feelings out and will cancel out their feelings of pain about the past abuse that they experienced. Another term I've put here for it is compensatory abuse, wanting to abuse them back. Now, there's a very important element of all this, which I've given a number of terms to it here. I'm very much into using language in unusual ways at the moment. I'm going to be doing a separate video on the issue of linguistics. So I've wrote 5 different terms here. One is pain replay. This is all about when we take memories of painful things and we keep replaying them in our head so that we experience the pain of those events over and over and over again. So it might be in a milder form, but sometimes we escalate our feelings of pain about that experience. The original experience might not be as bad as the way that we have been reliving it in our minds. So pain replay or replay torment, you torment yourself, memory torment, trauma dwelling, that's a nice little term for it, or the trauma loop. And I've wrote here that this thing, which I've given 5 different terms, the problem with it is that it massively increases and prolongs the pain of the trauma unnecessarily. When we do that, we often end up blaming the person who did something bad to us in the past. We're not just blaming them for what they did to us, but we are then blaming them for the fact that we have been punishing ourselves by reliving that trauma over and over again for years or even a lifetime. And this feeds into the revenge fantasy, where we want to punish the person not just for what they did, but we want to punish them for the fact that we ourselves have relived that trauma over and over in our mind ever since. It's not a default position that if you have a trauma, you have to keep living it over and over and over again. Of course, that's difficult, depending on the intensity of the trauma. There can be some types of traumas that are so intense that you need some sort of therapy, some specific help in order to overcome it. But sometimes a trauma that is not really that bad, not something that is like clinically bad, you can turn it into a clinical psychological problem simply by reliving it over and over again. A next issue about the harms that these things do to us is what I'll call anger blindness. And this is basically that when we are in a state of anger, or when we're in an intense state, a desire for revenge, it inhibits our intelligence because we start blocking everything else out and just thinking about how can I release my anger, how can I relieve myself of these painful, angry feelings, and how can I relieve myself of this urge toward revenge. And because we are so concentrated on that, we start ignoring other things that are important. We can ignore the welfare of people around us. We can ignore our own future welfare. I mean, how many people are in jail because they went and took revenge on somebody and did something bad, not thinking about the fact that, if I'll go to jail if I do this. Revenge can cause people to do extremely destructive things to both others and to themselves. The next is what I've termed delusional relief, which is basically this. If you punish somebody else, inflict some sort of violence for something that they've done to you in the past, or you perceive that they've done some wrongdoing, if you go and punish them, it doesn't take away the painful experience that you had in the first place. No matter how much you punish somebody else, even if you punish somebody else 10 or 20 times more, inflict 10 or 20 times more pain upon them than what they brought upon you, even then, it doesn't change the simple fact that you had the trauma to begin with. That trauma memory is still there in your mind, no matter how much punishment you inflict. You may get some temporary relief from it. You may have an intellectual sense that, I evened the score and I balanced things out, and they got what they deserved and I got the compensation that I deserved. But it's delusional because the painful memory is still there. It hasn't gone away. And so what can happen with that is people retain the anger, and they therefore retain the desire for revenge as well. And this is quite an interesting example of this. This is quite an intense example. This is an example of how bad this can be in the worst situations. Serial killers are very often wanting to take revenge on people who they perceive to have done bad things to them in the past. It could be a parent figure who was abusive. It could be somebody who bullied them and humiliated them repeatedly when they were younger, something like that. And they've escalated their feelings about that situation. They've replayed those traumas again and again and again throughout their lives, and they've intensified it. And what was done to them may have been really bad in the first place, but their level of anger about it has been escalated so much because they've been replaying these memories in the head. And so they go out and seek revenge, not just for what was done to them, but also for all the bad feelings that they've had since. And these bad feelings may have been so overwhelming that it's affected the quality of their life, limited their opportunities, and so on. So the desire for revenge incorporates all of that. And so what the serial killer will usually do is they go out and they look for some sort of victim who becomes a substitute for the punishment. They will take someone who's a complete stranger, who's done nothing bad to them, and they will murder them, sometimes in horrible ways, inflict incredible pain. But unconsciously, what they're trying to do is kill or hurt some psychological archetype from their own past. The person who originally did bad things to them might not be around anymore. They might be dead. Or that person might have grown old and they're not the same person, so punishing them as an old person wouldn't be the same thing. It could be somebody who they felt rejected them a great deal, a family member or some love interest or something like that. And so they seek out somebody else to punish, and that person becomes the victim who they choose doesn't realise it, but they are playing a role in the serial killer's fantasy of wanting to hurt this person from the past. So they do that with this victim, and the feelings go away for the serial killer, but only for a short time. And then those anger and revenge fantasies come back because they haven't actually dealt with the original trauma. Each time they kill or hurt a new person, the amount of time it takes before they get the urge to go out and take revenge on this psychological archetype again, it becomes less and less. The more revenge they take on the more substitute victims, the less effective it is at relieving them from the memories. And it's a pretty sad fact that, basically most serial killers, if they could actually deal with their own memory traumas and find a way not to relive them over and over again in their own minds, then they wouldn't feel the need to go out and substitute other people as victims. But the serial killer, I think, typically doesn't realise that what they're doing is trying to hurt the person from the past. So yeah, that's a really dark and intense example of what I call delusional relief. So that issue of what I call target substitution or enemy substitution, or compensatory enemies or substitute enemies, that particular issue is very, very common. People who generally have a kind of passive-aggressive thing where they suddenly fly off the handle unexpectedly, I think basically those people are carrying a lot of retained anger, which they try to suppress, hence they are passive some of the time. But the anger comes out very, very easily. I think what's happening for those people a lot of the time is that they are perceiving you, they are projecting upon you some archetype abusive figure from their own past. Whether that person actually did something bad to them or not in the past. Again, that can be open to discussion. But yeah, they're taking an archetype that they are carrying around in the world who was based upon a previous abusive person of some kind. And so what they end up doing is they end up taking out their anger or even committing revenge against people who haven't really done anything wrong to them in the first place. It's a massive danger of all of that. Another one which we've sort of breezed into, but I want to be more specific about it, or at least just give it a term that you can remember, is disproportionate punishment or disproportionate revenge. And, where what you do back to the person is excessive compared to what they did to you. I mean, some people, they can receive a verbal insult from somebody else and they can respond by being physically violent back to that person. Now, as far as I'm concerned, it's extremely rare that a person saying something actually justifies being violent toward that person. I'll bet there'll be a lot of you in the comment section who disagree with that. But, that's something that you would judge on a case-by-case basis. But it is definitely true that there are loads of situations in life where people become violent over somebody else simply saying something that they don't like. And sometimes it's not even that bad a thing. And so they are engaging in punishment of that person that is disproportionate. And again, it's largely underpinned by their desire to punish some psychological archetype from the past. And as I also mentioned earlier, a lot of the pain that we have from our past traumas isn't the trauma itself, it's the fact that we keep reliving it in our own minds. And the person who did the abuse is not actually the cause of that. It's ourselves. We're the ones who choose to relive those memories over and over again. So the punishment that we give back can be disproportionate on account of it. And the last element, this is where all of this stuff becomes extremely harmful to the world as a whole. I've given it a few terms for it here. One is revenge cycles, another is revenge loops, and another one is revenge dominoes. So the basic idea is that you go and punish somebody else for something that they did to you, and then that makes them become the angry person seeking revenge, and they will either hurt you back, do something bad to you, or worse, they will go and punish somebody else as a substitute when they really want to punish you. And then that other person didn't deserve it, and then they're the one who becomes angry and seeking revenge. So you get like a domino effect. It's almost like a virus. That person who they punish then has that problem. They go and do the same and hurt somebody else, and it triggers and it goes on and on and on. And God knows how much of the violence in our world is actually just this domino effect playing out, where people are just attacking other people because psychologically they represent people from the past. So yeah, revenge dominoes or revenge cycles or revenge loops. And the last one I've got on the list here regarding the harms is what I'll call traumanoia. This is a good one. Combining the words trauma and paranoia. It's funny because I actually think traumanoia might be a bit of a better word than paranoia, because paranoia, I think it is typically based upon perceptions of past experiences. Oh, the people did these bad things to me in the past, therefore they're going to go and do it to me again in the future. If I go into a new situation in life, then people are going to be nasty to me just like they were back then, and so on. Probably the most common example I've seen of this is when people were bullied in school. And they go throughout the rest of their lives feeling like the rest of the world is a school playground of bullies, when it's actually nowhere near as bad, partially because adults are much more accountable for their behaviour because the legal system targets them if they become violent and so on. But yeah, a lot of people go through life feeling like the world is full of bullies from school. And so they become angry and vengeful on account of that towards the world as a whole. Traumanoia. Paranoia based upon past traumas. The fear that a past trauma is going to occur again and again. All right, so that was the basic psychological core reasons for anger and revenge fantasies and the ways that they harm us and the world. I will also add that it can be particularly tragic for you and your family if you end up using your own loved ones as substitute punch bags for things that were done to you in the past. It doesn't have to be just violence, it can be psychological as well. Alright, so let's get into some solutions, practical ways that you can get rid of your own anger and revenge fantasies, because if you can do this, you take yourself out of that domino loop. If you can take all your past experiences and resolve them to the point where you don't feel this underlying urge to go out and hurt other people, then you are stopping the domino effect. You know, the domino can hit you and then you do not pass it on. It's fantastic if you can do that. Okay, so types of solutions. Well, first of all, the anger must be genuinely reduced. There's no point suppressing it into the unconscious, because then you just end up doing the substitutive punishment of others thing. If you still feel that anger deep down, you're going to go and express it in some way or another elsewhere, whether you intend it or not. So it's got to be genuinely reduced. Okay, so a number of steps you can take. The first is to familiarize and remember the concepts about the basics of anger and revenge fantasies, the ones I've described in the first part of this video, and remember the harms that it does to yourself and to others. If necessary, go back and watch the first two parts again, take some notes, remember the key points, and burn them into your brain so that you have much more awareness of how these things work. Simply being aware of these patterns and how they work, that in itself can help a lot of people just break the patterns quite easily. Because sometimes the most destructive psychological patterns are the ones that we are not aware of. They're destructive because we can't control them or fix them, because we're not even aware of that they're happening or how they're happening. A key point, a very simple one, try and remember this and remember it for the rest of your life and tell other people about it. Retained anger is delusional. The memories from the past are gone. They've already happened, and if you stop reliving them, then and you just be more aware of the present and just live in the present instead of replaying the past, then you're not going to have any more pain from it. And I would actually say that very often anger in the present is delusional as well. We're able to deal with present situations, even threatening ones, without getting angry. Anger, like I said, is the preparation for violence, and that was practical for us in a sort of a wilderness context, a caveman context, where violence was often the solution to problems. But in our actual world that we live in now, our civilized world, violence is very rarely the solution to your problems in daily life. So on that basis, anger, which is the edge toward violence, is hardly ever useful. It's mostly delusional and impractical. And simply realizing and reminding yourself from time to time that anger is delusional, that in itself can reduce your anger. Anytime you start feeling a sense of anger or start having some little revenge fantasy about someone in the past, just remind yourself in that moment, oh, anger's delusional, it's pointless, this doesn't serve any purpose. It's and the same with the revenge fantasies. Just let it go, because it's delusional. The next one, and this is very important, is to remember. Now, this is something that I think is extremely powerful, but is not easy for a lot of people to take on board. And that is that the universe owes you nothing, right? The universe has no obligation to be fair to you. The universe has no obligation to compensate you. And as far as the universe itself is concerned, you have no entitlement, right? Now that might sound a bit heartless, and it's not something I would agree with as social principles. But in practical reality, the universe owes you nothing for what you have suffered in the past. The universe does not owe it to you to give you some compensatory pleasure or relief for something that you've experienced in the past. The universe does not care in itself. The universe can witness any kind of cruelty, and karma doesn't always come into it. Horrific and horrendous things happen to people that go unpunished and were not deserved. This is the nature of the universe itself. It is largely indifferent. So once you accept that basic reality of the actual universe itself, instead of the moral structures that we create in our civilization, once you accept that as the base reality, that in itself, I think, takes away a lot of anger and revenge fantasies. And also, I think a major side note on that is to realize that whatever it is that you went through, the trauma, there's probably thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of other people who've been through similar experiences, and they were not compensated. They didn't deserve it either. It's not like you're some special victim and everybody else is not a victim, but you are the one who has suffered. I think when you get into that kind of victim mentality, where it's like, I'm a big victim and nobody else understands because they have had a more fair life than me, I think that can be a very dangerous form of self-identification to have, because that makes you feel like you're entitled to go and be cruel to other people because they haven't suffered what you've suffered. But if you actually take your real life sufferings that you've had, many countless people have had similar, and they didn't deserve it, and it went unpunished. The people who did those things to them went unpunished. And sometimes the bad things aren't even done by other people, they're done by nature itself. This isn't to say that you have to completely scrap your belief in all of the moral systems that we set up as a society. We try and use those systems to create a fair system, and it's important that we do that. But remember that reality itself doesn't deal in fairness, and nor should you expect it to do that. We can expect it from our institutions and from other people who we interact with, but remember, it is not the basis of reality. The next one is to remember that your abuser has virtually always been abused in some way themselves, and they might not even be aware of how that's happened. I mean, everybody in this world experiences some form of abuse from others, some sort of insults. Most of us have experienced at least some level of violence towards us from somebody else in our life. Most of us have been hit by another kid when we were younger at some point, or we've been hit by a parent and the parents went a little bit over the top with it and it wasn't needed. Most of us have experienced these kinds of things, and this applies to everybody who's done anything bad to you at any point. They've had things done to them by others throughout their lives, and they may not have told you about it, they might not have even consciously remembered all of those experiences, but they've had it, and those things have contributed to their actions toward you. Remember, when you get hit with unnecessary violence, punishment, abuse, whatever, remember that domino effect. The person who did that to you, there's usually a line of dominoes behind them where other people have done bad things to each other. It's hit them, and then that person's lashed out against you as a substitute for what they've experienced. So it's important to remember that the person who has abused you, you could call them the last domino, or you could call yourself the next domino, or something like that. Always remember that domino effect. The next basic principle is to accept all of the bad things that happen to you in your life. Don't judge them as right or wrong, just accept that they happened, because you can't change them. No matter how much you take revenge or go out and express your anger, you cannot change what actually happened in the past. You can change the way you think about it, and we'll go into that in a minute. But yeah, the past, it happened and it's gone. And in a way, you could say that your past traumas actually don't exist. This may sound a bit radical, but the past doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. Those things cannot be changed because they no longer exist. They only exist in your memory. And so once you take that attitude to the past, it's like, oh, it's all gone. Everything that ever happened to me in the past, it's all done and dusted and over with. It's gone. And therefore, there's no point me trying to change or fix things from the past. It's done. And it happened the way the universe intended it to happen for some reason. Or the universe was indifferent. And, this is such a big relief when you take this attitude to the past. And you just go, yeah, okay, that happened to me. I don't think it was fair. I didn't deserve that. But it happened and it's done and it's over, and I don't need to resolve it or fix it. In fact, I can't. Just acceptance of the past is very, very important. I've just wrote this as a term, event acceptance or past event acceptance. Oh, by the way, I've got another term there for what I was talking about earlier on, where I was talking about the domino effect and being aware of that. I just put a term here, cycle recognition. You're recognizing the cycle of revenges and punishments that get passed on like a domino effect. Just a nice term to remember, cycle recognition. The next one is how to deal with the traumatic memory in itself, how to change the way you remember the event so that it has far less of an effect upon you. It plays on your mind a lot less. And I've called it scrambling the trauma. There's different terms we could put on this. Or scrambling the imprinting, that's another one I wrote there. Or memory editing for all you film buffs. So basically you go into the past and you could think of all your memories as being stored in your mind, kind of like film reels. It's funny because we're born and we go through our lives up until the day we die, and it's all one continuous movie. You know, you have little periods where you go to sleep and it seems to stop, but from the moment you get up in the morning until the moment you go to bed, it's a continuous event, like a single movie, with no breaks, no edits. You know, your point of view doesn't cut away from your own eyes to somewhere else. Your experience doesn't jump across time the way movie editing does. But the way we store memories, I think, is very much like how movies are edited. And I think movies are edited in accordance with the way we store our memories. And the way that you remember that experience, it will have elements of film editing. You know, there'll be a starting point to the memory. You always remember the starting point. There'll be a few key events that happen in the middle, and you'll have those sort of marked out and edited in as part of the way you remember that memory. And then there'll be an end point where your recall of that memory stops, and then you stop thinking about what happened afterwards. But when you think about it, that's delusional, because you could take a trauma memory and your memory of it might emphasize, say, 40 seconds of what actually happened, but the real experience might have gone on for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. But there might be like 40 seconds or even 5 seconds of the event which were intense, and you've selected those out to be like the key clips from the memory that you remember. Now you can change that. There's no sort of law that says you have to remember this part of the memory as being the prominent bit. You can expand your awareness of the memory. You can think about the entire day of what happened with that memory and what led up to it throughout the day. You can think about what was happening that week or even that year and all of the various events that happened around that trauma event. And you can edit your own mental show reels of what happened and remember those instead. Because there's no fixed rules as to how we have to remember our memories, but we can cause ourselves a lot of pain. It's like if you took the worst horror movie that you've seen, when I say the worst, I mean if you took the most disturbing horror movie that you've seen and you make a mental edit, a sort of memory of that movie, and you pick up all of the most painful, terrifying, scary, disturbing bits of that movie, and you edited those together in your mind as like a 20 or 30 second clip, and then you remember that movie via that little edit that you've got in your head, you can cause yourself a lot of unpleasant feelings by reliving that memory in that way. But you could also take the same movie and you could, in your mind, edit out those bits and put in other bits of the movie that were interesting in some way and say, oh, well, this is the movie that I watched, you know? So yeah, I mean, there's loads and loads of stuff you can do with this, with the memory editing. And if you want to know a lot more about that, because we could talk about that for ages, I mean, you can change the way you think about your memories in terms of, a lot of people talk about wanting to get distance from their memories. And so often, if you get them to take the visual replay of their memory, the way they typically do it, and you ask them to put it on a cinema screen and move that cinema screen far away from themselves. You know, I'm moving it towards you here, but from your point of view, you know, the memory might be there as a big screen in your mind, and so it feels like you're intensely in the movie. But if you pull it far away and shrink it down like this and watch it from a distance, you are getting distance from the past memory. It's funny, these kinds of things actually work. You take a trauma memory and you remember it as if it's being watched on a distant small screen. You feel very different about it. You can play the memory at high speed or slow speed. You can add music to the memory to change the way you feel about it. You can make the memory black and white. There's all kinds of things. Just like with movie editing, there are endless choices of how you can choose to remember a past experience, and there is no definite right or wrong way of doing it. So you may as well select the ones that cause you the least pain. If you want to know more about these ways of playing around with the editing of memories, I recommend you go and study a little bit of NLP, also known as neuro-linguistic programming. There is a belief about NLP which has been spread by academia over the years, because NLP didn't come from academia, it came from outside of academia, and academia often doesn't like it when revolutionary or radical ideas come from outside of academia and get great results that the academics can't. Typically, academia will then attack those sources, and this has happened a lot with the NLP, or neuro-linguistic programming. I know that the NLP, it doesn't always work for everything in my experience, but there's a lot of great stuff in there, and I've used NLP to sort out all kinds of past traumas of my own, and I've helped other people do the same thing with their memories. There's a lot of good stuff in it. So yeah, I recommend you go and read up a little bit on that. Here's another one. This is a perception of the past that I've sort of figured out a while ago, and I've taken it on, and that is that the abuser from the past no longer exists because they've changed. People change all the time. They may not have changed in the way that you like. They may not have changed very much, but the person who did something to you bad in the past, that person is now a different person. If it's years ago, then that person has grown a little bit older. They've gained a load more mental experiences of the world, physical experiences of the world, and they are changing. People are changing day by day, all the time. We all continuously change. And so if you go and punish somebody now who did something bad to you a year ago or 5 years ago, that person is not quite the same person. They are a different person. You cannot punish the original person who hurt you because they no longer exist. A new version of that person has replaced them since. And that might be a much nicer person. It could be a worse person. I mean, that applies to yourself as well. You were abused in the past. You could say that I was abused in the past, but you've changed as well. You can think back to your traumas in the past and you say, oh, that happened to me. But the only me that exists is in the present. Whoever you were in the past, that person in the past is gone. You have changed. You've grown. A lot of your, if your experience was 10, 20 years ago, apparently the human body regenerates all of its cells like every 7 years. I think I read that somewhere in biology. So if your body has regenerated itself completely, a couple of times since you had that trauma, then you could argue that that person in the past who had the trauma, who used to be you, that person is gone. So the victim is gone, and the only you that exists is you in the present, in the here and now. And the same applies to your abusers as well. So again, this is another way of just making those memories just fade away. Actually, I'm using that term, fade away. You can actually take memories in your mind and you can fade them, you can blur them, you can reduce the contrast and the colour and stuff and make them seem like very old photographs. That's a good way of dealing with memories as well. All right, so that is all of my thoughts. Quite a few solution elements there. I mean, I did go around looking online at various other videos and some articles on the issues of anger. I didn't see a lot about revenge fantasies, but I didn't really find a lot of practical advice in any of those sources. I found stuff where they were talking about the nature of how anger works and then, oh, it works like this, therefore you should just let it go. But I didn't see much in the way of practical solutions, ways of changing your thinking so that the anger genuinely goes away. And I think I've given quite a few good practical ones for you to remember there. And some of them are quite unusual, ones that are little bits of advice that I've not heard anyone else give. That's just stuff that I've thought about over the years, especially in the last few months as I've become fascinated with this subject. Okay, so I hope that you watching this helps you to reduce your level of anger in the world and your desire to punish people, take revenge and so on. If it reduces it a little bit, that's positive. If it reduces it a lot, then I'm very happy. And yeah, if you take this stuff forward with you and it affects the way you interact with the world, if lots of you do that, I would like to feel, that there would be a lot of domino effects of punishment and revenge that would get stopped. not major ones, but small ones. And if there's thousands of them, that could be a really good thing. So I'm glad I did this video. If you enjoyed this, if you think this is useful, then share it with other people. If you know somebody who carries a lot of anger, then point them to this video, and I'm sure their comments would be pretty fascinating here. In fact, I'm very interested to see in the comments section here how people, some of you are going to try and defend anger and revenge fantasies. And I'm interested in how you try and defend them, retained anger and revenge fantasies. Some people will want to cling onto this stuff and won't want to let it go. And I suspect that the sense of entitlement to compensation from reality is going to be the core element of that. But yeah, I'm sure some interesting discussions should come out of this. What's your experiences been on the subject of anger and revenge? Have you ever taken revenge on anyone for things that they've done? I know I did that in the past at times. I did have a lot of anger myself when I was younger, and I definitely took out some of my anger about people in the past on people in the present without realising that was exactly why I was doing it. And I'm glad I've stopped doing that. And you never completely fix this problem because it's built into our nature, the edge toward violence and the edge to punish others who we feel are doing wrong. So you never completely fix it. I would lie to you if I said I never ever get angry or never ever have a revenge fantasy. But I've definitely reduced it to a level that is just a fraction of what it used to be, 10, 20 or 30 years ago. So yeah, that's a real positive for me, and I hope it has the same effect on you. I feel like I've been building up to this video for a long time, because a lot of these principles, I didn't just come up with them recently. A lot of these little jigsaw pieces to this issue have been slotting into place over the years, especially for some reason the last 6 to 12 months. Anger has been something I've been fascinated with because I've been getting back into a little bit of meditation. I've been going to my local Buddhist centre. I'm not a Buddhist. I'm not into any institutional religions, but I enjoy the meditation thing. So I've been hanging out in my meditation centre and just chatting with the people there afterwards and stuff, and chatting with the teachers there. So that's been quite enjoyable. And thinking back over those 17 years that I worked in all the mental health and stuff and all the angry situations I saw there, and there was little puzzle pieces here that I was using in the job to try and get people to be less angry. So yeah, that's about it, folks. I think I'm rambling a little bit at the end here. I've gone through all of my notes. So if you enjoyed this one, pass it on to other people who you think could benefit from the principles explained. And if you want more psychology videos, you can sign up to my Patreon. There's quite a few available on there. There's lots available on my website. There's articles, some of them free. There's videos. And there's plenty more on my channels here, so the channels will be listed in the video description. Okay, so I will see you folks soon. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.